We're continuing on Chapter 22 of Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. Welcome to the Go-Go 80s. In the summer of 1980, Barry Seal was released from prison into the chilly morning air. It sits on a 3,000-foot plateau of the capital, Tegucigalpa, Honduras, with the sun dappling the cobblestone of the main square, and the shoreline men and lottery ticket vendors unhurriedly moving their daily routine of setting up underneath the huge shade trees. The newly freed pilot casually walked down the cool, quiet streets, past vending carts offering fresh chunks of pineapple, juicy slices of coconut, and the ever-present bananas. As Barry strolled through the peaceful Spanish colonial center of Tegucigalpa, there was as yet no hint of the whirlwind about to descend, transforming this little tiny visited country into the Lebanon of Central America, and earning it a dubious place in history as the biggest drug market the world has ever known. During the next few months, the calm will be shattered with the roar of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bulldozers and huge military transport planes. As the American military presence began to build support, the Contra camps tucked discreetly away in the countryside. While in prison in Honduras, a country which gave the world the phrase Banana Republic, Barry Seal compiled a Rolodex of current players in narcotics smuggling. When he got out, he was ideally positioned to hit the ground running at the dawn of the Go-Go 80s in Honduras, which was just then becoming the hub of all the intrigue that money can buy. "We turned the whole damn country into an American battleship," lamented the chairman of the House Western Affairs Subcommittee later. "We created the USS Honduras. Just like a little noticed tropical depression that grows into a Force 5 hurricane, events in Honduras, that tiny and most backwards of countries, only Haiti in the Western world is poor, and not by much, roared like a 100-mile-per-hour gale through the lives of millions of Americans. Though Honduras and the good offices of the Honduran army came the cocaine blizzard that transformed millions of American lives. During the final days of the Contras, the Honduran army got busted with more than 6 tons of cocaine headed for the United States, a bust that came only after the end of the Contra War had diminished the usefulness of these particular tin-horn generals in mirrored shades. While in jail in Honduras, Barry met William Roger Reeves, a smuggler who told him that he worked for the Ochoa family of Medellin. At this exact time, the man who will become SEAL's chief pilot, William Bottoms, is released from the U.S. Navy, raising the prospect that SEAL's new enterprise might have been sanctioned from the very beginning at the very highest levels of government. Thus we have SEAL's release from prison in Honduras's Bottoms' release from the Navy, where, according to his own account, he flew sensitive intelligence missions, and the beginnings of the collaboration with Roger Reeves, and all occurring simultaneously, as if an unseen force or hidden hand were at work. But who was William Roger Reeves? Talented amateur or connected individual? Roger Reeves was an illustrious and famous smuggler who owned a house in Metairie near New Orleans, where he kept a beautiful grand piano which he played all the time when he was home. Former DEA pilot Dave Gorman told us, "We worked for the Jorge Ochoa cartel." Seal later told a U.S. court in Miami, as if the Ochoa cartel were a standalone entity. Reeves was a business manager, so to speak. This arrangement collapsed in August of 1982 when Roger Reeves was arrested by U.S. Customs. But by that time, Barry Seal was already becoming a legend among members of the Confederate Air Force, the loose-knit pilot fraternity in the South of former military and CIA pilots whose connections were formed in Southeast Asia, where the Reeves-Seal meeting mere happenstance, just the matter of chance that Seal's later testimony indicated? We found this doubtful. Seal was a master of casually concealing such sensitive matters of national security. He had, for example, told the DEA men debriefing him in 1972 that the plane was using to fly the 7 tons of C4 plastic explosives had come from some company registered in Delaware. So who was William Roger Reeves? When we located him through the federal prison system in the minimum security facility at Lompoc, California, we thought we would find an answer. Instead, what we discovered only added to the mystery. We had contacted officials at the prison over a year earlier to request an interview with their inmate Reeves. They explained the procedures for contacting a prisoner, and a month later we got word back that Reeves was uninterested in talking. Then Debbie Seal offered to help. She and he had been on friendly terms, and she thought he might talk to us if we used her name with him. But incredibly, when we recontacted the Lompoc Prison Administration, they denied ever having him in their facility. What's more, a second call to the Washington, D.C. federal location, which had originally given us information as to where in the penal system he was located, this time produced word that no such prisoner had ever been incarcerated in the federal system. As if that were not bizarre enough, we received word that he was serving out his American prison term in Germany, had been moved on our account. We called a law enforcement source to inquire. "I'm not sure you want to be asking about that," came his dark response. Then we met Reen Martin, a Cajun Carlos Marcello, lieutenant and smuggling pilot who had smuggled with and for Barry Seal many times. We had in Seal's own handwriting a record of their having done business together. 10/82, Ren Martin, 184K, and Jim Eakes, several days later, 60 more, paid 2.2 and 2.5 million. Read the note we found in Seal's files. Reen told us that he had first met Roger Reeves when Reeves walked into his mob-run firm, Gulf Caribbean Enterprises, located at the corporate heart of New Orleans, one Shell Square. Reeves, according to Martin, was a former Orange County, California firefighter who had taken to piloting single-engine planes for fun and profit. By the time Reeves hit New Orleans, he was ready for the big time and had soon leased a 90-foot shrimper when made an epic round of the world drug run, sailing through the Suez Canal and then stopping for a load of Thai stick and heroin before proceeding across the Pacific to the West Coast. But Martin didn't see Roger Reeves as CIA merely entrepreneurial. Martin is also involved in the smuggling run that Seal eventually pled guilty to in Louisiana. A long and at times hilarious smuggling story involved a load of cocaine that had been flown to White Castle, Louisiana, and was ultimately purchased by Seal. 2 kilos from this load were sold to an FBI undercover agent by Seal's associate, CIA man William Erlisle Sr. Barry Seal began to fly cocaine for the Ochoas in an operation staged out of the Carver Ranch in Belize, which was run by Chester Cotter. And although these two individuals have made appearances in books about Seal and cocaine cartels, We had read nothing given the slightest clue to who either Cotter or Carver were. Which was strange because the Carver Ranch is where Arkansas's governor, Bill Clinton's best friend Dan Lassiter, flew in 1984, seeking to buy it. Lassiter, a big player in the cocaine traffic network as early as the mid-1970s, has the distinction of being the only man in anyone's living memory so well connected that not one but two separate organized crime drug task forces into his organization in Arkansas and again in New Mexico were shut down before completing their work. The Carver Ranch was a refueling stop for smugglers coming up from Colombia. Located near the border with the Yucatan, it has cropped up in a number of investigations, one of them the MENA probe of Arkansas State Trooper Russell Welch, which focused on Berry Seal smuggling empire. No simple horse farm, Carver Ranch was part of a trafficking empire. Cotter, the manager, it was said, was a man with legendary sway over the local peons. He would personally greet arriving planes with fuel supplies at the ready on the landing strip. Accompanied by Patsy Thomas, later a top Clinton White House official, Lassiter flew to Belize in his private Learjet to negotiate the purchase of the 24,000-acre Carver Ranch. But the deal fell through. Reported partners in power because of a dispute with a governor of Belize. He proved hard to deal with, according to one observer. One man of the Lassiter party then proposed that the governor should be wasted. This caused some consternation for the U.S. ambassador, who was present during the negotiations. Also present was a lawyer from Washington, D.C., named Ed Cummings, who had flown down with Lassiter, ostensibly looking for a horse farm. The story always seemed heavily redacted to us, and we found out our instincts had been right when we learned who the two men had been that were associated with what we learned had been the CIA's Belize refueling depot. Mob pilot Rean Martin, we discovered, knew intimate details of the operations staged out of the Carver Ranch. He had helped to build the first crude 3,000-foot runway there, hacked out of the jungle by hundreds of native workers in the remote northwest corner of Belize. Mr. Carver, for whom the ranch was named, had been a naval inventor helping perfect Allied submarine warfare back in World War II, and Chelsea Cotter, who had such a legendary sway with the peasants in the countryside, had acquired this clout through the simple expedient of killing any of them who got in his way. Rean Martin described Cotters as a character like the CIA agent upriver and out of control played by Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. Cotter had a silo on the ranch that was filled with corpses, Martin told us. He killed so many that the Belize government finally stepped up and killed him, Cotter. If true, this would explain the truculence. I've never heard that word before. If true, this would explain the truculence shown by the governor of Belize to Lassiter's party in 1984. Might Lassiter's secret mission have been to smooth out a potentially explosive situation with a murdered CIA agent and a sullen populace? That neatly explains the rancor in the reported comment of the Lassiter lieutenant that the governor should be wasted. What seemed like rhetorical overkill in the context of a failed real estate deal now made perfect sense. Was Lassiter conducting state-to-state negotiations? If so, he had clout of a caliber any mafioso of the D's, dem, and does y'all variety would envy. Labeling Dan Lassiter as Dixie Mafia, as some have tried, conceals his affiliation with the real organization with the power to shut down criminal investigations. The intelligence reports show that the DEA opened a file on Lassiter in 1983 and assigned him a tracking number. Lassiter was tipped off at once, according to Ambrose Evans Pickard in The Secret Life of Bill Clinton. Roger Reeves introduced Seal in early 1981 to Felix Bates, and the Ochoas, and Barry soon found himself dealing with the Colombians directly. It was the birth of what had later become known as the Medellin Cartel. One of Seal's top Colombian contacts was a woman who always wore a costume, according to Barry's widow, who met her several times at Miami's Omni Hotel. She would turn up in a nun's habit or dressed as a nurse. Her role is later taken by Carlos Bustamante, who became the Ochoa's distributor in Miami, who called himself Lito. Seal calls himself Ellis Mackenzie, using the name of the criminal black Honduran boat captain he had met in prison. Lito's real name, too, was a closely guarded secret, and Seal would contact him by calling one of 3 numbers on Lito's pocket telephone pager. Barry Seal was rapidly becoming, in certain circles, something of a smuggling legend. Barry Seal was the Henry Ford of the drug smuggling industry, says Miami private eye Gary McDaniel, who made a specialty of drug cases. He brought military logistics to bear on the problem of transportation, which had been the bottleneck in the 70s. Seal developed a system that utilized military equipment, electronics, aircraft, communications gear, etc. He was able to succeed because local people thought it was a military endeavor, McDaniels told us. But smuggling was not all Barry was doing this time. Some might even say that was just his cover. During this same time period, Ambrose Evans Pickard told us he had learned that Barry was doing recon work very early after the Sandinista Revolution. While home, Barry played the devoted family man according to numerous accounts. One lifelong friend, John Prevost, remembers Seal's suburban dad days well. The way I always remembered Barry was how I saw him one day when he passed me on the freeway. It was the mid-70s and he had an old station wagon, and he passed me. He gave me a big wave and I heard his good-natured laugh. And he's wearing a big t-shirt. He's got a baby in his lap and another on the seat beside him. His car window's open and he's singing along at the top of his lungs to some song on the radio. Not exactly a portrait of an American drug lord. Prevost's description of Seal described not so much a drug kingpin as a mid-level government functionary home for the weekend. Could the two, in fact, be the same? Seal approached his task with the zealousness of a CEO in a startup company in Silicon Valley. He studied mistakes previous traffickers had made by reading the testimony in big federal drug conspiracy cases, and even attended trials when he could, soaking up information like a student attending seminars. Ultimately, he created a system that was nearly fail-safe. His planes departed from and returned to his Louisiana bases at night, without lights. They didn't need any. His pilots wore third-generation military-issue night vision goggles at $5,000 a pair, which electronically magnified the available light from the stars and moon 50,000 times. Seal had such a good source for state-of-the-art night vision goggles that Baton Rouge DEA asked him for some. He obliged. Once over Colombia, Seal's fleet of planes flew through windows in Colombian airspace, precise periods paid for with bribes when the military could look the other way. For the military, this often meant looking straight down into the red jungle dirt, which they would have needed to be doing to avoid seeing the dozens of flights which took off every night at dusk. You would be sitting in your plane overlooking the sea on a runway hacked out of a mountainside, smuggler pilot James Poach told us. Then, as if on cue, when the sun went down, you would see dozens of tiny specks taking off from tiny mountain runways in the hills around Santa Marta, flying out over the water into the twilight, heading north. It was a beautiful sight. The Operation Sea Spray. It was a joint CIA military operation in secret warriors inside the covert military operations of the Reagan era. Stephen Edmondson described Sea Spray as a joint Army-CIA project to move counterterrorism forces secretly into and out of foreign countries. We provided instant clandestine aviation to anyone and anywhere in the world. A former Sea Spray member told Emerson, Barry Seal, we soon learned, had been an integral part of Operation Sea Spray. In March 1982, Sea Spray began flying electronic spying missions with a Beechcraft King Air, flying 4 miles above the border of El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. The plane intercepted communications from left-wing opponents and right-wing death squads trying to disrupt Salvadoran elections, Emerson's wrote. In Seal's files were FAA title records we discovered detailing the hidden ownership of Seal's fleet of smuggling craft. In these documents we found the FAA title records for 2 identical King Air purchased for this new program and delivered to Seal at exactly this time. Sea Spray got its names from its pilots, who had often flown just 60 feet above the waves of the Gulf of Mexico in total darkness, except for dim light from an instrument panel. They flew so low that waves would occasionally splash the aircraft windshield. One pilot spoke of a new co-pilot completely losing it and breaking down into tears from fear. Re-entering U.S. airspace, Seal's smugglers slowed to 120 knots, so that on radar screens they looked like helicopters coming ashore from oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. The planes would pass over a radio checkpoint on the beach, usually at Grand Isle just off the marshy Louisiana coast, and if the radio man on the ground determined that the plane was not being followed, the mission was completed, with the plane following radar beacons to drop sites in remote parts of the Louisiana bayou. Duffel bags filled with cocaine parachuted to Earth to be picked up by circling helicopters, which would in turn drop their cargo to vehicles waiting to transport the dope to distribution centers in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles. The operation more truly resembled an underground cargo airline like Federal Express than any romantic notion of bush pilots flying loads of marijuana with a margarita in one hand. The dope business is all about protection, former Louisiana State Police official Stan Hughes said. Remember when Diane Sawyer went down to Colombia to interview Ochoa and Escobar? How could she find them when the U.S. government couldn't? And how come all these guys have got zoos in their backyard? Come on, they own the government. The surge of cocaine exports Barry managed and facilitated was for the consortium of Colombian cocaine brokers known as the Medellin Cartel, which by 1980 had acquired the dubious reputation of supplying some 75% of all U.S. cocaine. This was a lie, and not a little white one either. It served to protect, until their services were no longer needed, the people whose coke was really ravaging America, Cali. We began to learn a little about what came to think of as the myth of the Medellin Cartel. The propaganda first concealed the names of the true authors of the cocaine blizzard, Juan Mata Ballesteros and the Cali cartel didn't need machine gun wielding toughs. They controlled the government of the countries in which they operated, including Honduras. According to a study by the U.S. state, the Medellin cartel began in 1980 when the Marxist revolution group M19 kidnapped a member of the Ochoa family, already a prominent cocaine manufacturing clan. At a meeting in his Medellin restaurant, George Ochoa convinced the major cocaine families to contribute $7 million each for the formation of a 2,000-man army equipped with the latest automatic weapons. Over the coming months, the cartel's army fought and won a war with M19, forcing survivors into an unwilling alliance that strengthened the cartel's hand. More importantly, the process of fighting a common enemy tightened ties among the drug families, and they developed a close cooperation in the years following their victory. Several years ago, we began to hear disquieting rumors that the true story of the creation of the Medellin cartel had not yet been told, that it might well have taken place somewhere in the northern hemisphere. What do you think? A bunch of peasants in the Andes got together and said, "Let's create our own little OPEC," scoffed one Special Forces veteran of our acquaintance who had spent time detailed to Peru in the 1980s. We created the cartels. It made it easier to deal with than 100 squabbling warlords, so we put them all under one management. Startling as it was, we had little trouble crediting this statement. It fits with the knowledge that has accumulated about the Medellin cartel. Investigative journalists Alexander and Leslie Cockburn were the first to report that the Medellin cartel made $10 million contribution to the Contras, for example, at the behest of Felix Rodriguez, CIA agent, shooter team alumni, and close friend of George Bush. Raymond Millian testified to this fact to Senator Kerry's Senate subcommittee, to the same reaction for the major media as Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series received. And General Miguel Maza, chief of Colombia's intelligence DAS, reports Cockburn's dangerous alliance that he believed the CIA had ties to the Medellin cartel, which the agency has gone to some lengths to conceal. Then in Miami, we met Paul Etzel, a soft-spoken Colombian accountant who had worked in Barry Seal's organization in the mid-'80s, also serving as Seal's interpreter, including in Panama in meeting with cartel honcho Pablo Escobar. Etzel later went to jail for 6 years. He displays the refined European manners of the South American elite, which were doubtless among the qualities that led Barry Seal to recruit him. "You know, of course, don't you?" Etzel asked us halfway through lunch in a Cuban restaurant in Hallandale, in a Miami suburb, that Barry Seal created the Medellin cartel. We were forced to tell him we hadn't. According to insider Etzel's account, Barry Seal took warring groups, competing factions, and brought them together, melded them, showed them the benefits of acting as one. He brought together the Ochoas and the Ledir and Escobar, all of whom were at each other's throats, and got them to work together. One on whose orders had done this, we demanded. Paul Etzel didn't know. Barry got big real fast, says retired DEA agent Dick Gustafson. When I was transferred back to Baton Rouge DEA office in 1980, Barry Seal was all anybody in the office wanted to talk about, but we could never catch him. He would have his helicopters do drops in Ascension Parish, and I have interviewed people out there on both sides of the Emite River numerous times, and nothing. I went to work undercover in 1979, former narcotics investigator Stan Hughes told us. Buying weed behind McDonald's from 16-year-old kids, I hated it. It was pointless and stupid, but working Barry Seal wasn't a whole lot different. I still have an 8x10 glossy picture of Barry while we had him under surveillance, coming out of Baton Rouge Airport in a pickup truck after supervising flying in a load. He actually stopped at the stop sign, looked both ways, waved at me and my partner, and drove away, says Hughes. When Barry got busted on the Quaalude thing, and I heard about there being government intervention to save his ass, I didn't believe it at first. But talk to any smuggler, and they'll tell you they can always buy their way out of a dope deal. It was all just a game, mostly their SEALs' intelligence was always much better than ours. Hughes smiles. One time we were watching Barry's house from the air, and he comes out waving a white sheet in surrender, and then a kid came out carrying 3 suitcases and gets in a car and takes off. And we think, aha, so we've tracked the car all the way to Arkansas, where we found him, where we found out from the kid that Barry had given him 3 empty suitcases and $1,000 and said, drive to Arkansas and get that helicopter off my back. By 1982, in the words of a congressional investigation headed by Massachusetts Senator John Kerry, the Medellin cartel had perfected the cocaine smuggling business into a high-tech secret trade based on specialization, cooperation, and mass production. By 1988, the cartel's annual income was estimated at $8 billion, and Forbes magazine put 2 of its leaders, Jorge Ochoa and Pablo Escobar, on its list of the world's richest men. As the cartel's exports expanded in the early 1980s, the Kerry Committee reported there were signs its smugglers were using CIA covert operations to protect their cocaine shipments into the United States. This is like saying after an elephant has rampaged through your living room and defecated on your oriental carpets, that the turd left behind is a sign of pachyderm presence in the neighborhood. All major U.S. investigative agencies have been forced to admit with varying degrees of frankness that the Medellin cartel used the Contra resistance forces to smuggle cocaine into the United States. The State Department said that available evidence points to involvement with drug traffickers by a limited number of persons having various kinds of affiliations with or political sympathies for resistance groups. The war in Central America contributed to weakening an already inadequate law enforcement capability, exploited easily by the organization of mercenaries, pilots, and cartel members involved in drug smuggling. But the real Barry Seal was also far more impressive and well-connected than the character played by Dennis Hopper in HBO's made-for-TV movie some years ago, loosely based on the smuggler's life. The film portrayed the pudgy pilot as a hapless victim caught in a crossfire between bungling but benign government agencies and Latin drug lords. The truth is a richer and altogether more sinister matter of national corruption. Many of Seal's planes had been previously owned by the CIA, Front Air America, and their ownership showed evidence of almost casual passing back and forth between similarly connected front companies like Seal's. 3 Piper's Navajos involved in Barry's cargo airline were suspected by U.S. Customs as having been owned by Air America. Louisiana State Police Lieutenant Bob Thomason said intelligence reports on Seal date back to 1972. Mr. Seal was suspected of being the head of a large drug smuggling organization consisting of some 60 people, operating in 6 or 7 states and several foreign countries, Thomason said. By 1988, as cocaine was busily destroying the fabric of America's inner cities, the New York Times reported that the Reagan administration was told that the Honduran military, which had been providing critical assistance to the guerrillas fighting the Sandinistas, may have been involved in drug dealing, perhaps as early as 1981. In a February 12, 1988 story, the Times reported that a former official in the Drug Enforcement Administration said that a United States drug sanctioned in Honduras relayed the allegations to his supervisors from 1981 to 1983, but was ordered not to investigate them. According to a former Drug Enforcement Administration official, an American drug agent stationed in Honduras from October 1981 to 1983 sent intelligence reports to Washington charging Honduran military officers, particularly in the Navy, with facilitating the transshipment of drugs to the United States, reported the Times. The agent Tom Zapita was also said to have charged that Honduran military officers, including Colonel Leonidas Torres Arias, the chief of Army intelligence, were protecting drug traffickers. The most prominent of those was Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros, a Honduran believed to have close links to the Medellin drug cartel of Colombia, and who was returned to the United States this week to face drug trafficking charges. John C. Lawn, head of the DEA, said Zapata's charges about corruption in the Honduran military were backed by too little evidence to merit an investigation, and were similar to reports sent regularly from dozens of other countries. He said the agency had never been ordered to ignore the Honduran military services. He said the agency had never been ordered to ignore the Honduran military's involvement in drug crimes. That would be a violation of my oath of office, Mr. Lawn said, but Lawn is lying. In 1983, the DEA closed its office in Honduras, a country that had become the biggest open drug bazaar the world has ever known for what it said were budgetary reasons. A federal drug official said it had not been productive. Finally, in 1988, the New York Times takes a stab at reporting what was common knowledge in Central America at least 5 years earlier. When they got around to leaking the truth, it was for a reason. It was just 6 days after they had run this headline: Honduras plans to block Contras from its territory. The Honduran army had made a bid for more money, and the CIA sent a message back through the New York Times. It's impossible to miss the connection between the two headlines unless we suppose you're a reporter from the Times. Not a case of investigative journalism, alas, but just the normal grinding of two tectonic plates against each other, signifying nothing more or less than business as usual. Someone had merely been sending someone else a message about straying from the reservation. And that's it for today.